Okay, Nick, you want to get started?
All right, let's do it. Thank you. Yes.
Oh, and I was also going to say, it seems to work well for the speakers to call on whoever they want to and just sort of, run things, generate the discussion. So feel free to feel free to do that.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, I think I'll talk a little bit and we'll do a little exercise, a little exploration of movement, and then uh, take some time to play with uh, whatever creative materials you're working with, journals or art or whatever your creative medium of choice is, and then do do a little discussion, questions, whatever. So hi everyone. All right, well, we're here to talk about neuroexpansive embodiment. And I got into this topic long ago, just first as someone exploring embodiment practices in general, as a teacher of Aikido and physical theater practitioner. But as I started exploring autism more in depth, as I started exploring what it meant for me to thrive in the world as an autistic person, autistic embodiment became very interesting to me, that there are very distinctive movement signatures, movement patterns that I see in the autistic community that seem to be fairly cross-cultural. And, body language in is fairly diverse cross-culturally. So for the most part, one sees, one takes one's gestures for granted as, oh, this is the way body language works. Eye contact or lack of eye contact means this, and this sort of posture means this. Shaking your head, shaking your head this way means one thing, nodding your head this way means another. But it turns out, or even just how close do you stand to someone during an in-person conversation? Do you face them directly or less so? All of these are things that people sort of take for granted often as, oh, this is what body language is like, until one travels and encounters people from dramatically different cultures and then discovers that these are actually culturally learned, and that body language is a very deeply culturally ingrained thing that we start picking up from infancy, but not necessarily innate. What really struck me with autistic people, though, was that there are autistic ways of moving, sort of ways of rocking, rhythms, ways of using the hand and such, that seem to exist in autistic people cross-culturally. There's something that runs deeper than learned culture that unites us in our embodiment. And of course, that interacts with and blends in interesting ways with whatever cultural styles of embodiment we've learned, and with whatever practices we've done to shape our embodiment. And that can mean something intentional, like a martial arts practice or a yoga practice or a dance practice, or it can be very things like, being on a cell phone all the time, which is, terrible for the body, generally speaking, to be hunched over a smartphone a lot. But it is an embodiment practice in that it does shape how we embody ourselves. And one sees a great deal of that just going around in the world these days. Oh, that person, that person carries themselves in some way. They've been doing something, hitting the gym, they've been doing yoga, they've been doing a martial art. Oh, that person spends all of their time either on the laptop or the smartphone, and you can see it in the bodies and see how people are shaped by the body shaping practices of their cultures. And autistic embodiment, whatever is innate to us as autistic people, comes through that. And of course, there's like, oh, this is there's something fundamentally autistic still, whether this person is a spend all their time on the phone and the laptop person, or spend time at the gym or in martial arts training person. There's, among autistic people, there are certain distinctive ways of embodying, of using the body. I think there are distinctive neurotypical ways of using the body as well. I think there are distinctive dyslexic ways of using the body. I think there are, I think there's a lot of that, much of which is invisible to one unless one looks for it. But looking at the autistic ones, they're very distinctive. And stimming particularly is, which I'll talk about in a moment, is a crucial part of autistic embodiment. So one of the things that really strikes me with autistic embodiment is if you look at a neurotypical embodiment, so much of it is learned body language, and so much of it is, this is how you use the body socially. And autistic people use our bodies very much as part of our cognitive process. How we do our sensory processing and our connection with the broader environment is mediated through the body and happens. There's a bodily response to it and a bodily way of playing with that and tapping into the environmental connections and the cognitive and perceptual states that we can access. We do it very often through the body, and it's often, generally, it's a sort of an unconscious instinct at first. There's sort of this autistic embodiment genius of finding these not culturally learned ways of moving and using the body to connect with one's own capacities, and also with one's capacities for connection with something larger than oneself. And so this is an interesting side effect. Neurotypicals love to say that autistic people are, in some way socially impaired. And it's a major feature of neurotypicalism, of course, that neurotypicals have this terrible social impairment where they can't relate to people who differ cognitively from themselves. But I think one of the reasons that neurotypicals read autistic people as socially impaired is that so much of autistic embodiment doesn't have a social purpose. It has other purposes. And the great mistake that has been made by people who try to teach social skills to autistics, meaning trying to make them act more neurotypical, the great mistake that they make is assuming that because autistic ways of moving and embodiment don't have a social purpose, they don't have a purpose. But they do have cognitive and perceptual and purposes of connection with an environment beyond the human social environment. So one of the things that interests me here is the autistic people, the way autistic people often lose their distinct ways of moving because it's been trained out of them. There's a great effort to train them to not move like autistic people. In a sense, interestingly, what I find is that non-speaking autistic people are more likely to retain their distinctively autistic ways of moving just because of the prejudice of neurotypical society. Neurotypicals have lower expectations of non-speaking autistic people. And because they have lower expectations, they don't work as hard to try to force them to blend in. And so more of that, and I look at non-speaking friends like Tito Mukhopadhyay, I say really there's this full-on STEMmy autistic embodiment that's lovely to behold, and that a lot of speaking autistic people lose to some degree. So one of my projects in life, as I figured this out, was reclaiming the autistic embodiment that I'd been taught to suppress. And what I discovered was doing that, letting myself move like an autistic person and rock more and use my hands and my gaze and such like an autistic person and explore my sensory environment in an embodied way, like I did when I was a small child. I discovered that this gave me access to levels of cognitive capacity and creativity and such that I'd lost, and that I could actually regain all of these cognitive capacities I've forgotten about by regaining the movements associated with them. So this is an ongoing topic of interest to me, and related to that because I am a teacher of transformative embodiment practices. I teach Aikido, I teach somatic psychology and such, and most of the people I teach are not autistic. That's I just the majority of my Aikido students and my somatic psychology students in academia are neurotypical or at least not autistic. What I find is that autistic styles of movement, autistic modes of stimming and rocking and such, actually have beneficial cognitive effects for non-autistic people as well. They don't come as naturally to non-autistic people, but they're learnable. And so in talking about entitling this talk, Neuroexpansive embodiment, that's sort of what I'm getting at, that autistic people can expand their neurocognitive capacities by leaning into autistic embodiment tendencies. And so can non-autistic people. There's this beautiful somatic bodily intelligence that comes with being autistic that gets so interfered with by people's attempt to suppress it. And I favor the opposite approach, which is not only, of course, creating a more autistic friendly environment in society as a whole, but also looking at what can be learned by non-autistic people, what can be learned from autistic embodiment and autistic modes of environmental relationality. And that, I believe, all happens through the body primarily, that's it's hard to imitate autistic cognition if you don't have it innately, but I think that there's an embodiment that can be tapped into there that opens up a similar and autistic style of environmental connection and pattern recognition and such. So I just want to, having talked for a bit, invite a little exercise in this. So you can, if you are shy about this sort of thing, you're free to turn off your camera. I'll ask you to turn it back on after the exercise. You can keep it on, but I'm just going to invite everyone to take a moment and find some stillness. Not a forced stillness, no, not holding yourself still. Let any movements arise that are going to arise. So you don't have to hold back any movement, just a nice relaxation where you're not actively trying to do anything. We'll just take a moment. I'm going to pause periodically. We'll have some moments of silence to explore. So first, just explore, just not doing anything, just hanging out. Feeling what is happening in your body, on the surface, the tactile experience of your skin touching the air and clothing and whatever it's touching. And internally, what's going on? Where does movement happen in your body naturally when you breathe? Notice your breathing, notice what's happening there. And then start noticing what movements exist in the body. What's moving even when you're relaxed and still? The way your body is moved by your breathing? Is there a little energy, a little impulse to movement in fingertips or a hand, a foot, a leg, somewhere? What is the movement that's already there? Find something that's happening or something that wants to happen in your body, and just start making it bigger. It can be very slight. Just a slight, oh wow, it would be comfortable to move my finger a 1/4 inch to one side. It would be comfortable to shift my posture just a little bit, but whatever that is, start doing it repeatedly and bigger. Find a movement that you can repeat and enlarge and involve more of your body in it. And just keep doing that. Stay with it. Stay with this unfolding process of allowing some movement in your body to repeat and get larger and mutate and evolve, and to involve more of you. If you're starting out with a small movement, how can you make it bigger and engage more of your body in it? If your breathing moves your shoulders in a particular way, can you exaggerate that? And then how does that move your arms? And can you exaggerate that? And just play for a while, really looking to find two things: rhythm, where the movement repeats itself, and exaggeration, where the movement keeps involving more and more of your body. Good. Stay with it. Stay with it a moment longer. Really see how big can you make whatever's happening. And we're going to segue from here. Play with this movement as long as you want to. Let it evolve as much as you want to. When you're ready, we're going to make a transition, and do this at your own pace. Take your time. We're going to make a nice transition from winding down the movement to doing whatever you want to do with whatever creative medium you want to work in. Do some journaling, write stuff down, do some drawing, or just keep moving. But we're just going to segue smoothly into the creative processing of this. And I'll give us 10 minutes or so to just do that, and then we'll come back and talk. Okay, take your time. Keep doing what you're doing. It'll take maybe another minute or two, just gradually wrap up your process, or continue doing it in the background in another minute or so. We'll start doing some discussion. So I'll just start calling on anyone who puts a hand up in a minute or so. All right, let's just open up some conversation with whoever wants to jump in.
So I've been learning martial arts in a completely new way. There's no martial in it. Like I'm learning that the Taolu, or the forms, are these holographic blueprints for wellness, that they're dances more than, I mean, especially in America, as you know, it's all about violence and self-defense. And I've been doing these prescribed movements out in nature, and allowing myself to break out of the pattern if my body's called to move in a different way. And I'm trying more to embody the idea of the Taolu, or the form, the animal that it's trying to capture, and things like that. Yeah, the idea of movement as a blueprint for wellness is on a holographic level is really interesting to me. So I was trying to sort of draw, I don't know if you can see it, but trying to draw, get to that sort of holographic movement as art, as movement sort of thing.
Lovely. Thank you. Morgan, is that a hand up?
Yes. I was going to actually ask for Dawn to show that picture again you made. Oops. Okay, awesome. What's so interesting is when you held that up, like all the curves and everything, and like the concept of movement, and there's a lot of like roundedness. What I drew, I just kept on doing repetitive movements when I drew, and I did something similar. So I thought that was so interesting that you did the very similar but very different. But is that I was, when we were talking about the movement thing, I kept on swiveling my chair, and so I thought about that arc movement, and then in different directions. So each like stroke was done 3 times. And so I always thought that was soothing as a kid. And so drawing and everything. It's just interesting. Yeah.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. Roger.
Yeah, this is really eye-opening. I think the minute you said, just sort of go where your body takes you. There was a bit of a relaxation, and a freedom about that. So I mean, I guess the reason why it struck me was because the minute you said that, there was some kind of a mental shift in my head, and so I just started going with it, kind of looking around and moving around, and breathing different ways, opening my eyes, closing my eyes, and notice that a lot of these things, you would think that they're just movements, but there is sort of a I'm not even sure what to call it. It's sort of like a mental feeling that comes with certain motions. Like for instance, the first thing I did was I was looking up towards the ceiling, and I realized that there was some sort of a tension relieving effect, of doing that, and which sort of faded over time. But then you let your body do something else, and then that can recreate that feeling, or it changes that feeling, and then you can do something else, which then, I mean, it's subtle, it's not something that's whacking you over the head with a hammer. If you're paying attention to it, I do think you can feel it.
Yes.
So it then got me thinking, like, how much of this programming, for instance, when we're taught in school, you're supposed to have a quiet body, you're supposed to sit straight up, you're supposed to look at the board, you're how sort of restrictive that is, and how helpful is it? Except maybe for the teacher, who doesn't have to. Everyone's just still. But for the learner, it may not be the best solution. And I guess that kind of ties into what's now more common is like sensory movie days, or things where, like, you don't have to, you can feel free to follow the motions of your body, and it's not that you're not paying attention, it's actually kind of enhancing the experience.
Yes.
I guess the problem is that, if you're not free to do that, or you're going to be judged if you do that, then you remain sort of closed off. And I guess that you learn less, because I guess so much energy is just you're just using so much energy, to you could think that staying still is also purposeless. If your natural inclination is to not be still, then the act of suppressing that, what's the purpose?
Yes. Well put. Well put. Dawn, did I see a hand up again? Go for it.
Yeah, it's interesting as a primatologist / anthropologist, people are always sending me Bigfoot videos. And they're like, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And I always say it's a dude in a suit, because you can tell a human being moving through the forest is just not like it's written all over their body, all over their embodiment, their movement, that they don't belong there. Like it's very obvious. And I think most of us, certainly in modern culture, go through life with that kind of existential awkwardness, if you want to put it that way.
Yes.
I mean, it does seem unreasonable. You know, I guess the more you understand maybe the diversity on our planet, and even sort of the vastness of the universe, you know, that one's experience of all of these things, you know, so I mean, there's just sort of an infinite amount of physical phenomena going on around us,
Mhm.
you know, that we would even begin to, I guess, experience it in exactly the same way, and then dictate rules on how other people should be experiencing it. You know,
Mhm.
it is almost like the idea that someone is created using a mold,
Yes.
and then everyone's exactly the same, you know, and the people who aren't the same, you know, there's something wrong, you know, that
Mhm.
they didn't fit the mold. Where in fact, you know, the mold is, in my opinion, some sort of artificial construct,
Oh
you
yeah.
know, and that organically people are by their nature extremely different.
Oh
Um,
yes.
I guess how we're brought up, you know, is not to be thinking in that way, which I think is really, I think it, you know, neurotypical or not, yeah, I think it does a lot of harm, you know, because it forces everyone, you know, to do things in kind of this artificial way, you know, that may or may.
Is Roger frozen?
No,
I
Okay.
I'm just thinking. Sorry.
That's all right. It was a beautiful stillness. I didn't want to interrupt it, but and I was like,
I was kind of lost in a thought there.
that's great. That's great. I know sometimes stillness is just the thing too, right?
Yeah, if I'm thinking really hard, I become a statue, you know.
That's cool. I've been so many Zoom meetings where someone's frozen and I'm, you know, someone has frozen. So I thought I'd make sure. But yes, no, beautiful. Thank you for these thoughts. Yeah, I believe, I don't know if you know read my more recent work on this, but there this idea arose sort of early on in the emergence of autistic culture and autistic rights activism. This, you know, this term neurotypical emerged back in the early 90s. And it is sort of this whole idea of neurotypes of people, you know, you're born neurotypical, or, you know, or neurodivergent in some way, you know, autistic, or, you know, and or dyslexic, and or this and or that. And I have moved away from that line of thinking. I think that in itself is artificial, in the same way that like racial categories are artificial. And this actually queer theory and Judith Butler's work on gender was really informative to me. It kind of got me using this term neuroqueer, thinking about how you know, people are born with so many potential, you know, ways of gender expression and sexuality, and how this you know, people are trained into this heteronormativity and into binary gender roles. And then there's people who really don't fit into those at all, don't fit into the heteronormative model. And, you know, as they say, you know, in queer theory or in the queer community, they queer heteronormativity, they subvert it, diverge from it creatively in all sorts of ways. But I've come to the conclusion, and this is where I've been working on this thing called neuroqueer theory. That's kind of an expansion of queer theory into the realm of neurodiversity. I've come to this conclusion that nobody is born neurotypical, that neurotypicality is like heteronormativity, that it's something that's learned. It's a particular set of learned social styles and learned modes of embodiment and thought. And the whole contrasting, autistic or otherwise neurodivergent people with neurotypical is not really like, it's not scientific. It's a purely social division of neurotypical is really just like, it's a particular normative performance that society attempts to instill in everyone. And a person, when we describe a person as neurotypical, we just mean that they're capable of doing that performance well enough to not get pathologized.
I kind of wonder whether or not it's, what is the function of these things, and whether the function is even relevant today, that we should be thinking of them. If you think about human beings have been around for thousands of years, and maybe we evolved certain behavioral patterns, in order to maybe band together and kind of foster our survival. But we become more sort of organized, and how we think about other people, and society has evolved.
Yes.
And these old ways of being, have we outgrown them, and is really the next sort of generation of thought, is sort of a break from this common practice of this, I guess, an illusion of a normalcy or sort of a standard.
Yes, exactly.
I agree that order is needed, for society to function, but we need to know when it's needed and when it may not be needed or helpful. And I'm thinking that's been a very particularly challenging process, especially if stuff that you can't see is supposed to also have this tremendous amount of variety and diversity, and how do they wrap their heads around that, and would they have to sort of abandon their older schools of thought in order to adopt this new one, and how scary would that be for people if they grew up a certain way and now they're expected to, or they're encouraged to take a sort of a different path, and maybe possibly where a lot of this resistance comes from.
Oh yeah, one can see that intense level of fear, and the rage it inspires in some people. We're really seeing this massive polarization between people who are open to greater and greater expressions of human diversity, and the people who really just want to clamp down on it and keep their old normal, and are willing to be quite violent about it. And it's a increasingly an extreme polarization as the people who are deeply attached to the old norms become, I think, more desperate, feel more threatened by it. And it's intense.
If you feel a sense of mastery, when you say that this could be likened to a performance, I guess with some folks the performance is easier or less taxing, than others. And if you've perfected the performance, and now the performance has less value, then are you going to agree with that line of thinking? I mean, there's an inherent sort of conflict of interest there. So your idea is sort of to perpetuate, what you believe, is correct, or the way it ought to be, which is usually in line with how you're doing things.
Yes, exactly. Yes, people. It's one of the extraordinary things about the human mind, that we're biocultural. We're like biologically set up to soak in and internalize the cultures we're raised in, and so whatever we internalize culturally starts to feel natural. And I think, yeah, people who have internalized different types of normativity think of it as natural, and they see divergence from it as some blasphemous, unnatural deviation, some deviation from the natural order, rather than as an expansion of culture. And again, that gets internalized in the body, that all of these things, all of this happens. Culture is so much passed down through bodily practices. And so there's that tapping into the body's capacities and our capacities for kind of an internally guided way of moving and being that's natural to us. And then, how that can conflict with or change and transform culturally learned movement. And that becomes extremely threatening to people who are threatened by deviations from their sense of cultural norm. The rewards of exploring our deep natural movement tendencies, as the cognitive rewards of that are extraordinary, I found.
Now, do you think that a lot of those movements, could they be highly influenced by sort of the nurturing of human beings? Like, for instance, there's maybe natural potential, but over repetition and sort of reinforcement by society, that you are sort of conditioned into thinking this is the natural way of being, feeling. So it's almost like it's different from, say, one's own natural tendency. If somebody is constantly being conditioned, to feel a certain way, and then what they do is just sort of perpetuate, those motions, because that's how they've been conditioned to feel.
Yes.
For like decades. And I guess like it's almost like a motor skill or something, where you learn how to, and then pretty soon you're doing it without really thinking, right?
Yes.
Then somebody wants to like adjust the size of the pedals, or change that system or tweak it a little bit, and then like that becomes like uncomfortable, and it sort of creates like this sort of mental, I guess, sort of this dystonia, which I think then triggers people to become upset, and when people get upset, then they start reacting in ways that maybe aren't the most rational, and then you have this sort of perpetuation of these things that are artificial, that have been there forever, but may not be sort of the most helpful for the next step of our development as a species.
Yes, exactly. And so there is some natural capacity. I think that we each have some unique capacity underneath all of the culturally learned movements that have come to feel natural, there's something else that is more spontaneous that can be tapped into. And that's where so much of my curiosity lies, where I see there's a particular autistic, like sort of innate bodily genius for that, of tapping, of staying connected to that capacity, that, or where that exists side by side with the culturally learned stuff. And I think that's something anyone can do, is find out what does my body really want? What do I really want on a bodily level underneath the stuff that's been that I've been taught to repeat so much that it feels natural.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense, where you have, there are things that are, I guess, more deeply rooted in the biology, but if you're not exploring those things, then you will never find them.
Yes.
But the first step is knowing that they're there, and that what you may be doing, there may be a better option.
Yes.
Kind of reminds me of when we're kids, we're taught certain rules,
Mm-hmm.
and these are reinforced, repeated over and over again for years, and then we're adults, we find out that those rules don't always apply, but if we're still going to accept that those rules apply in all situations, then we're going to get stuck. Because the world is a much more complicated place.
Oh, yes. All right. I see Dawn's hand up, and I gotta take off in a minute. So Dawn.
Yeah, I have a friend, Terry Notary. He's the guy that trained all the people in the new Planet of the Apes movies to move. And we had this great conversation about how when people start moving in those ways, how they just have this amazing set of epiphanies. They cry, they laugh, they release. It's like just moving like a normal primate is
Yes.
so incredibly powerful. So I encourage everyone in their living rooms to get their ape on.
Absolutely. Oh, it's beautiful. Well, that's a great note to close on. I do have another meeting happening starting in about 30 seconds. So I'll have to take my leave of you. Thank you all for having me here. It's been a real pleasure getting
Thank
to
you
be
so
here
much.
with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We really appreciate all of your wisdom and insight.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.